A scarred dog steps into a lonely garage. What begins as a desperate act to a thrilling journey of trust and an unexpected family bound by a love that defies all odds. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe our channel, Pause Verve. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and share it with others. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm on the tin roof of Jack Harper's small house on the edge of Willow Creek. Inside, the air was thick with the kind of quiet that seemed to swallow sound, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Jack sat at his kitchen table, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that hadn't held coffee in hours. The table, worn smooth by years of use, bore the scars of countless meals shared with his daughter Lily, scratches from her toy cars, a faint burn mark from a forgotten candle, and a heart carved into the corner with her initials. Now it held only a single photograph, its edges curling slightly from time. In it, Lily, all of 16, grinned beside Jack, both of them smudged with engine grease, holding up a wrench like a trophy after fixing their old pickup truck. That was before the accident, before Lily's mother was taken from them, before Lily moved across the country to live with her aunt, chasing a life Jack couldn't give her in this sleepy town. Jack's eyes, shadowed by grief and 3 sleepless nights, lingered on the photo. At 48, he looked older than his years, his dark hair streaked with grey, his face etched with lines that seemed to deepen with each passing day. His mechanic's coveralls, still dusted with grease from the day's work at Harper's Auto, hung loosely on his frame. The house, once filled with Lily's laughter and the clatter of tools as they tinkered together, felt like a museum of memories, each corner preserving a moment he couldn't touch. The silence was louder tonight, pressing against his chest, until it ached. He tried filling it, blaring the radio, leaving the TV on, even talking to himself as he rebuilt carburetors in the garage, but nothing worked. The emptiness wasn't just in the house, it was in him. He stood, the chair scraping against the floor, and crossed to the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the world outside into a grey haze. Willow Creek was a small town, the kind where everyone knew your name and your sorrows. Jack had grown up here, raised Lily here, buried his wife here. He'd always been the steady one, the man who could fix any engine, solve any problem, but he couldn't fix this. He couldn't bring Lily back to fill the rooms with her voice, couldn't undo the distance that had grown between them since she'd left 2 years ago. Their phone calls were short now, her voice polite but guarded, as if she were afraid to stir the pain they both carried. Jack didn't blame her. He hadn't known how to be a father without her mother, hadn't known how to keep her close when grief built walls faster than he could tear them down. His gaze drifted to the coat rack, by the door, where Lily's old denim jacket still hung, its sleeves frayed from years of wear. Beside it was a leash, bought years ago for a dog they'd never gotten around to adopting. An idea flickered in Jack's mind, faint at first, then growing brighter, like a spark catching kindling. He wasn't looking for a pet. Not really. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that the hole in his life needed something, anything, to make it feel less like a void. The shelter, Hope Haven, was just a mile down the road. He'd driven past it countless times, seen the faded sign promising second chances. Maybe that's what he needed. A second chance, not just for himself, but for something else that had been cast aside. Jack grabbed his keys from the counter, their familiar jingle cutting through the quiet. He pulled on his raincoat, the fabric stiff and cold, and stepped into his work boots, still caked with mud from the garage. The photograph on the table caught his eye one last time, and he paused, his throat tightening. "I'm trying, kid," he whispered, though no one was there to hear. He opened the door and the rain greeted him with a gust of damp air, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. His pickup truck waited in the driveway, its red paint dulled by years of sun and storm. As he climbed in, the engine sputtered to life, a comforting rumble that felt like an old friend. The windshield wipers dragged across the glass, their steady rhythm matching the pulse of determination growing in his chest. The road to Hope Haven was dark, the streetlights flickering in the downpour. Jack drove slowly, his hand steady on the wheel, though his mind churned with doubts. What was he doing? He wasn't a dog person, Not in the way some people were, with treats in their pockets and toys scattered across their lawns. He didn't know the first thing about caring for an animal, but the thought of returning to that silent house, to another night of staring at Lily's photo, was unbearable. He needed something to change, even if he didn't know what that something was. The shelter's sign came into view, its letters barely legible in the rain. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a single car parked near the entrance. Jack pulled, in cutting the engine. For a moment he sat there, rain hammering the roof, his reflection ghostly in the windshield. The man staring back at him looked tired, worn, but there was a spark in his eyes he hadn't seen in years. He took a deep breath, stepped out into the storm and headed for the shelter's door, each step carrying him closer to something he couldn't yet name. The heavy glass door of Hope Haven Animal Shelter creaked as Jack pushed it open, bringing with him the sharp scent of rain and the faint tang of motor oil clinging to his damp raincoat. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the musky smell of fur and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the chipped linoleum floor and faded posters of smiling dogs on the walls. The shelter was a modest place, its peeling paint and mismatched furniture telling a story of too little funding and too many animals. From somewhere deeper in the building, a chorus of barks rose and fell, a mix of hope and desperation that seemed to echo Jack's own restless heart. At the front desk, a young woman looked up from a stack of paperwork, her hazel eyes bright despite the late hour. Her name tag read Sarah, and her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping as if she'd been rushing all day. Her smile was warm but practiced, the kind honed by years of greeting strangers with both compassion and caution. "Evening," she said, her voice soft but clear over the distant barking. "Welcome to Hope Haven. Are you here to adopt or just visiting?" Jack hesitated, water dripping from his raincoat onto the floor. His boots squeaked as he shifted, his weight suddenly aware of how out of place he looked, a grease-stained mechanic in a place meant for hope. He cleared his throat, the sound rough from disuse. "Not sure," he admitted, his voice low. "I'm looking for the dog nobody wants." The words felt strange on his tongue, raw and unguarded, but they were the truth. He didn't want a bouncing puppy or a polished purebred. He wanted something as broken as he felt, something that needed a chance as badly as he did. Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyes searching his face. She took in his weathered appearance, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. Jack knew what she saw, a man who looked like he'd given up. Maybe that's why she didn't brush him off or steer him toward the cheerful dogs in the front kennels. Instead, she set down her pen and stood, grabbing a ring of keys from a hook behind the desk. "Follow me," she said, her tone careful but not unkind. "We keep some of the harder cases in the back." They moved past the main adoption floor, where dogs pressed against their kennel doors, tails wagging furiously, their barks a cacophony of eager pleas. Jack kept his eyes forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, the clamor of hopeful animals tugging at something he wasn't ready to feel. Sarah led him through a door marked "Staff Only," into a quieter hallway where the kennels were spaced farther apart. The air here was cooler, the sounds muted, as if the dogs in this section had long since stopped expecting visitors. Most of the kennels were empty, their occupants either adopted or given up on. Sarah stopped at the very last one, her keys jingling softly as she gestured to the occupant. "This is Rusty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might startle the creature inside. In the back corner of the kennel, a Labrador retriever lay curled into a tight ball, his golden coat dulled by scars and patches of thinning fur. One ear was torn, and his right front leg was held at an awkward angle, the result of some old injury never properly healed. His eyes, one clouded with a cataract, the other a deep, wary brown, stared at the wall, refusing to meet their gaze. A sign on the kennel door, written in bold red marker, read, "Rusty, not adoptable, fearful, caution advised. He's been..." "Here 4 years," Sarah explained, her tone heavy with a mix of pity and resignation. "Came from a bad situation, found chained in a junkyard, half-starved. We've tried working with him, but he's difficult. Doesn't trust people, won't let anyone touch him. Sometimes he snaps if you get too close." She paused, studying Jack again, as if weighing whether to continue. "He's not up for adoption, technically. We keep him here because we don't have the heart to give up on him, but nobody's ever asked for him." Jack crouched slowly, his knees protesting until he was eye level with Rusty. The dog didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, but Jack could see the tension in his body, the way his muscles quivered as if braced for a blow. Scars crisscrossed. Rusty's face and shoulders, some old and faded, others deeper, telling a story of pain Jack could only imagine. There was something in the dog's stillness, in the way he seemed to make himself smaller, that felt achingly familiar. Jack had spent the last 2 years doing the same, shrinking into himself, hiding from a world that kept moving without him. "I'll take him," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm, surprising even himself with the certainty in it. Sarah blinked, her keys slipping slightly in her hand. "Mr. Jack, just Jack." "Jack, I need to be clear," she said, her words measured. "Rusty's not like other dogs. He's got serious behavioral issues. He needs someone with experience, someone who knows how to handle—" "He'll be fine," Jack interrupted, standing now, his eyes still on Rusty. He didn't know why. He was so sure. Only that something in the dog's guarded gaze mirrored the ache in his own chest. They were two souls nobody wanted, cast aside by a world that didn't know what to do with their brokenness. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, her expression softening as she looked from Jack to Rusty and back again. Maybe she saw the same thing Jack felt, an unspoken understanding, a shared need for a second chance. "All right," she said finally, "but you'll need to sign some waivers, and— do you want a leash? A crate?" Jack shook his head. "He'll follow." The paperwork at Hope Haven Animal Shelter took longer than Jack expected, each form a reminder of Rusty's complicated history. Sarah handed him page after page, her pen marking spots for his signature, as she explained the shelter's liability waivers in a practiced tone. Words like behavioral issues and potential for aggression floated through the air, but Jack barely registered them. His focus was on the kennel at the end of the hall, where Rusty remained curled in his corner, a scarred Labrador retriever who seemed to carry the weight of the world in his stillness. Jack signed where indicated, his handwriting uneven from disuse, and when Sarah finally unlocked the kennel door, the metallic clang echoed in the quiet hallway. "Rusty," Sarah called softly, her voice gentle but firm. "Come on, boy." The dog's torn ear twitched, but he didn't move, his body pressed against the concrete wall as if he could disappear into it. Sarah glanced at Jack, her expression a mix of concern and resignation. "He might need some time," she said, stepping back to give him space. Jack didn't speak. He didn't crouch or whistle or offer the coaxing words most people might try. Instead, he stood just outside the kennel, his rain-soaked boots leaving small puddles on the floor, and waited. His hands hung loose at his sides, his posture relaxed, but deliberate, the way he'd learned to approach a stubborn engine that refused to turn over. Patience was something Jack understood. Patience with machines, with grief, with himself. He figured Rusty deserved the same. Minutes passed, the only sounds the distant barking from the main adoption floor and the steady drip of water from Jack's coat. Sarah shifted her weight, her keys jingling faintly, but Jack remained still, his eyes fixed on the dog. Finally, Rusty's head turned, his good eye, a deep, guarded brown, meeting Jack's for the first time. There was no trust in that gaze, only a wary assessment, as if Rusty were calculating the risk of moving closer. Jack didn't flinch or look away. He let the moment stretch, let Rusty see him for what he was, a man with no expectations, no demands. Just an open door, slowly, painfully, Rusty uncurled himself. His movements were stiff, his right front leg dragging slightly as he stood, favoring it to avoid pressure. Each step was measured, deliberate, his body low to the ground as if expecting a trap. He limped past Sarah, past the kennel's threshold, and stopped a few feet from Jack, keeping a careful distance. His scarred coat caught the fluorescent light, revealing the depth of his wounds, some old and silvery, others raw, etched into his golden fur like a map of survival. Jack nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned toward the shelter's exit, trusting Rusty would follow. The drive home was quiet, the rain a constant patter against the pickup's windshield. Rusty lay in the passenger footwell, making himself as small as possible, his body pressed against the door. Jack didn't try to pet him or fill the silence with words. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee, the grey sky blurring through the wiper's steady sweep. The truck smelled of wet dog and motor oil, a combination that felt oddly right, grounding Jack in the moment. When they reached Jack's house, a modest single-story with weathered siding and a sagging porch, he parked in the driveway and cut the engine. The sudden absence of noise felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Jack opened his door, stepped into the rain, and walked around to the passenger side. He pulled the door open and stood back, rain dripping from the brim of his hood, giving Rusty space to decide. The dog didn't move at first, his good eye scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. 1 minute passed, then 2. Jack waited, unhurried, his breath visible in the cool air. Finally, Rusty shifted, easing himself out of the footwell with the same cautious deliberation he'd shown at the shelter. His limp was more pronounced now, each step a small act of courage. He followed Jack to the front door, maintaining exactly 6 feet of distance, his head low and his tail tucked. Jack pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside, leaving it ajar for Rusty. The dog hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the air, then crossed into the house, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood. Inside, Jack hung his raincoat on the rack, the denim of Lily's old jacket brushing against his hand. Rusty moved past him, his movement slow and purposeful, surveying the living room with his good eye. The space was sparse, a worn couch, a coffee table cluttered, with auto magazines, a single lamp casting a warm glow. Without a sound, Rusty slipped into the kitchen and disappeared under the dining table, pressing himself against the wall where the shadows were deepest. His body blended into the dim light, only the glint of his eye betraying his presence. Jack didn't follow. He moved to the kitchen, his steps deliberate, and pulled a container of leftover chili from the fridge. The microwave hummed as it heated, the smell of spices filling the air. He set a bowl of water and some kibble, bought on a whim earlier that day, near the table, far enough to give Rusty space. Sitting down with his chili, Jack ate in silence, the scrape of his spoon against the bowl, the only sound. Every few bites, he glanced at the dark shape under the table. Rusty hadn't moved, but his eye watched Jack, steady and unblinking. The house felt different tonight, not full, not yet, but less empty. 2 broken souls shared the same space, neither ready to bridge the gap, but both present in a way that mattered. Jack took a slow breath, the ache in his chest easing just a fraction, and scraped the last of the chili from his bowl. Rusty's gaze followed him, a silent question hanging in the air between them. What happens now? The kitchen clock ticked softly, its rhythm blending with the fading patter of rain against the windows as night settled over Jack Harper's small house in Willow Creek. The single lamp in the living room cast long shadows across the hardwood, its warm light barely reaching the kitchen where Jack sat at the dining table, his empty chili bowl pushed aside. Across from him, under the table's sheltering overhang, Rusty remained a silent presence, his scarred Labrador retriever form tucked tightly against the wall. The dog's good eye gleamed in the dimness, tracking Jack's every move with a wariness that spoke of years spent bracing for betrayal. The bowl of kibble and water Jack had set out sat untouched, the kibble's faint grainy scent mingling with the lingering spice of the chili. Jack leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Maybe a bark, a wag of the tail, some sign that Rusty knew he was home. But the dog's stillness, his deliberate choice to hide, felt right somehow, like an acknowledgement of the space they both needed. Jack understood that kind of retreat. Since Lily left, he'd spent countless nights retreating into himself, shutting out the world to nurse his grief. He wouldn't push Rusty, Not when the dog's guarded presence was already more than Jack had dared hope for. He stood slowly, careful not to startle the dog, and carried his bowl to the sink. The faucet groaned as he rinsed it, the sound sharp in the quiet house. Rusty's eye followed him, but his body remained still, a shadow among shadows. Jack dried his hands on a faded dish towel and glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. The night stretched ahead, heavy with the promise of sleepless hours. He considered turning on the TV, letting the drone of late-night talk shows fill the silence, but the thought felt wrong. Tonight wasn't about drowning out the quiet, it was about learning to share it. Moving to the living room, Jack lowered himself onto the couch, its springs protesting faintly. He reached for an auto magazine from the coffee table, flipping through pages he'd read a dozen times. The words blurred. Articles about torque converters and fuel injectors couldn't hold his attention, not with Rusty's presence pulling at the edges of his awareness. He glanced toward the kitchen, where the dog's outline was just visible under the table. "You're all right, old man?" Jack murmured, more to himself than to Rusty. The words felt clumsy, but they carried a warmth he hadn't expected. He set the magazine down and leaned his head back, closing his eyes. Memories of Lily crept in, unbidden but not unwelcome. He saw her at 10, sprawled on this same floor with a toy wrench, mimicking his movements as he worked on a neighbor's lawnmower. "Like this, Daddy?" she'd ask, her voice bright with pride. He'd taught her how to change oil, how to listen for an engine's heartbeat, how to trust her hands. Those moments had been their language, a way to connect when words failed. Now the tools sat unused in the garage, gathering dust alongside his courage to face them. A soft sound, a faint scrape of claws on wood, pulled Jack from his thoughts. He opened his eyes to find Rusty shifting slightly under the table, adjusting his position. The dog's bad leg dragged as he resettled, his body still pressed against the wall, but less rigid now, as if the act of moving had been a small concession to comfort. Jack didn't react, didn't call out or try to coax him closer. He understood the importance of small steps, of letting trust grow in its own time. He stood, joints stiff from sitting, and moved to the kitchen to refill Rusty's water bowl. The dog's good eye tracked him, alert, but not alarmed. Jack set the bowl down a little closer this time, maybe a foot nearer the table, and stepped back. "Whenever you're ready," he said quietly, not expecting a response. He turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the living room lamp to cast its soft glow, and headed down the hallway to his bedroom. The house felt different as he walked. Not alive exactly, but inhabited in a way it hadn't been in years. In his room, Jack kicked off his boots and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sagging under his weight. The bedside table held a single framed photo, Lily at her high school graduation. Her smile bright, but her eyes carrying the shadow of her mother's absence. Jack touched the frame lightly, his fingers tracing the glass. "Brought someone. Home tonight," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Think you'd like him." He lay back, staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of rain a lullaby he hadn't noticed before. Sleep didn't come easily. Never did. But as Jack drifted on the edge of consciousness, he was aware of the house's new rhythm. "Somewhere in the kitchen," Rusty breathed, a soft, steady sound that wove into the night. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the silence feel less like a weight and more like a shared space, a beginning. Jack closed his eyes, the ache in his chest softer now, and let the night carry him forward. Morning broke over Willow Creek with a tentative grey light, the rain of the previous night giving way to a damp mist that clung to the grass and blurred the edges of Jack Harper's small house. Inside, the kitchen was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of brewing coffee and the faint mustiness of old wood. Jack stood at the counter, his calloused hands wrapped around a chipped mug that read Harper's Auto in faded letters. A promotional giveaway from years ago when business was steadier. His eyes, still heavy with the weight of a restless night, drifted to the dining table where Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, remained tucked in his chosen sanctuary. The dog's golden coat was barely visible in the shadows, his good eye a faint glint, watching Jack's movements with unwavering focus. Jack moved through his morning routine with the mechanical precision of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. The coffee maker gurgled to a stop, and he poured a second cup, the dark roast's bitter aroma grounding him. He'd bought a bag of kibble on his way home from the shelter, guessing at the brand since Sarah hadn't specified what Rusty ate. The kibble rattled into a metal bowl, the sound sharp in the stillness, and Jack placed it a few feet from the table, alongside fresh water. Rusty didn't stir, his body curled tightly against the wall, but his eye tracked the bowl's placement, a silent acknowledgement of the offering. "Take your time," Jack said softly, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't expect a response, didn't need one. He sipped his coffee, the heat stinging his tongue, and leaned against the counter, letting the morning unfold. The house was still, but it felt different now, as if Rusty's presence had shifted, its rhythm. The silence wasn't as oppressive, tempered by the soft sound of the dog's breathing and the occasional shift of his bad leg against the floor. Jack pulled on his work boots, the leather worn soft from years of use, and headed to the garage attached to the house. Harper's Auto was a one-man operation, a cluttered space filled with the familiar smells of oil and metal. He left the side door open, a habit from when Lily used to wander in, her small hands eager to hold a wrench. Today, he left it open. For Rusty, though he didn't expect the dog to follow. The garage was his sanctuary where the world made sense. Bolts tightened, engines purred, problems had solutions. He set to work on a sedan's brake pads, the clank of tools and the hum of an old radio playing classic rock, creating a comforting symphony. Hours passed, the mist outside burning off as the sun climbed. Jack was elbow-deep in the sedan's wheel assembly when he heard it, a faint click of claws on concrete. He didn't turn, didn't pause, his hands steady as he loosened a bolt. But he knew Rusty was there, standing at the threshold between the house and the garage, watching. The dog didn't cross into the garage, didn't make a sound, but his presence was a tangible thing, like a shadow cast by something solid. Jack kept working, letting Rusty observe, letting him decide how close he wanted to come. That evening, Jack heated a can of soup, the kitchen filling with the smell of tomatoes and herbs. He sat at the table, the same table where Lily had once drawn her first engine diagram, her pencil scratching eagerly. Rusty was still under it, his body less tense now, his good eye following Jack's movements. The kibble bowl remained untouched, but the water level was lower, a small victory Jack noted without comment. He stirred his soup, the spoon clinking against the bowl, and found himself talking, his voice low and halting. "Lily was 12 when she fixed her first carburetor," he said, the words spilling out as if Rusty had asked. "Came running into the garage, all excited, waving this rusted piece of junk she'd found at a yard sale. Said she wanted to make it work again." He chuckled, the sound Rusty like the dog's name. "Took us 3 weekends, but she did. It should have seen her face when it ran, lit up like the 4th of July. Rusty's ears twitched, the first sign he was listening. He didn't move, didn't emerge from his hiding spot, but his gaze held steady, reflecting the kitchen's dim light. Jack took another spoonful of soup, the warmth spreading through him, and kept talking. She loved cars, wanted to open her own shop one day, call it Harper and Daughter. His voice softened, the ache of memory tightening his throat. "Don't know if she still wants that. Don't know much about what she wants anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy, but not crushing. Jack hadn't spoken about Lily like this in years, not to anyone. The town knew his story, widower, daughter gone, garage keeping him afloat, but no one asked and he didn't tell. With Rusty it was different. The dog didn't judge, didn't offer pity. He just listened, his presence a quiet anchor in the darkening kitchen. Jack finished his soup, rinsed the bowl, and glanced at Rusty. The dog's head rested on his paws now, his body still but not rigid, as if the stories had eased something in him too. Jack turned off the light, leaving the lamp's glow to spill into the kitchen, and headed to bed. As he lay there, the house's silence felt softer, woven with the faint rhythm of Rusty's breathing. It was a small thing, this shared routine, but it was a start, a thread connecting two solitary souls in a world that had left them both behind. The days in Willow Creek settled into a quiet rhythm, each one blurring into the next, as Jack Harper and Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, navigated their shared existence. By the 5th evening, The kitchen of Jack's small house carried the familiar sense of motor oil from his coveralls and the faint, savory aroma of a grilled cheese sandwich sizzling in the pan. The dining table, scarred with memories of Lily's childhood, stood as a silent witness to their tentative coexistence. Rusty remained under it, his golden coat blending into the shadows, his good eye tracking Jack's movements with a vigilance that hadn't yet softened. The kibble bowl, placed a little closer each day, showed signs of cautious nibbling, and the water was consistently lower by morning, a quiet sign of progress Jack noted but didn't dwell on. Jack flipped the sandwich onto a plate, the bread, golden and crisp, and sat at the table. The kitchen was dimly lit, the single bulb overhead casting soft shadows that danced with the flicker of a distant streetlight through the window. He took a bite, the cheese warm and melty, and chewed slowly, his thoughts drifting to the garage. Work had been steady, brake jobs, oil changes, a tricky transmission that kept him late, but it was the moments between tasks, when he'd hear Rusty's claws click at the garage threshold, that lingered in his mind. The dog never entered, never crossed that invisible line, but his presence was a constant, like a heartbeat in the background of Jack's day. He glanced at Rusty, whose head rested on his paws, his bad leg tucked carefully beneath him. The dog's scars caught the light, a map of pain that mirrored the invisible ones Jack carried. "Got a call from Mrs. Thompson today," Jack said, his voice low, as if continuing a conversation they'd been having for years. "Wants me to look at her old Buick again. Swears it's making a new noise. Bet it's the same belt as last time." Rusty's good eye blinked slowly, his ears twitching at the sound of Jack's voice. It was a ritual now, these one-sided talks, a way to fill the silence without demanding anything in return. Jack took another bite, the sandwich slightly overcooked but good enough. As he chewed, his knife slipped, nudging a small piece of crust onto the floor. The soft pat of it hitting the linoleum seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. Jack froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes flicking to Rusty. The dog's head lifted, his nose twitching as he caught the scent of warm bread and cheese. For a long moment nothing happened. The air felt charged, like the pause before an engine turns over, every possibility hanging in the balance. Then, slowly, Rusty moved. His body unfolded with deliberate care, each motion a study in caution. His bad leg dragged slightly, causing him to favor his left side as he crept forward, his belly low to the ground. Jack kept his eyes on his plate, his movements slow and unhurried, as if the moment were no different from any other. He took a sip of water, the glass cool against his lips, and listened to the faint click of Rusty's nails on the floor. The dog paused several times, his body tensing as if expecting a trap, but the lure of the crust was too strong. Inch by inch, he closed the distance, his scarred muzzle stretching forward, keeping his body as far back as possible. With a quick, delicate motion, Rusty snatched the crust, the bread disappearing in a single bite. He retreated immediately, but his movements were less frantic now, less afraid. He settled back under the table, not quite to his usual corner, his good eye fixed on Jack with a new intensity. Not trust, not yet, but something closer to curiosity. Jack allowed himself a small glance, his face carefully neutral. "Not a fan of my cooking, huh?" he said, the barest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. He returned to his sandwich, the moment settling into the quiet like a pebble in a still pond. The rest of the meal passed in silence, but the air felt different, lighter, as if a door had cracked open just a fraction. Jack cleared his plate, rinsing it under the faucet with the same deliberate care he'd shown all evening. He refilled Rusty's water bowl, nudging it an inch closer to the table, and checked the kibble, noting a few more pieces missing. As he turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the living room lamp's glow, he felt a shift in the house's rhythm. It wasn't just his space anymore, it was theirs, marked by this small act of bravery from a dog who'd spent years expecting the worst. Jack moved to the couch, grabbing an auto magazine but not opening it. Instead, he leaned back, his eyes drifting to the kitchen. Rusty's outline was clearer now, his body less hunched, his head resting on the floor rather than tucked, defensively. Jack's thoughts wandered to Lily, to the times she'd drop a cookie or a carrot stick and laugh, pretending it was for an imaginary dog. "We'll get one someday, Daddy," she'd say, her eyes bright with plans. He wondered what she'd think of Rusty, of his scars and his silence. She'd probably sit right there on the floor, patient as anything, waiting for him to come to her. The clock ticked toward 10, and Jack stood, stretching his stiff back. He glanced at Rusty one last time, the dog's eye catching the light like a distant star. "Night, old man," he said softly, and headed to bed. As he lay in the dark, the house's quiet felt alive, woven with the faint sound of Rusty's breathing and the memory of that small, brave step. It was a beginning, fragile but real, and for the first time in years, Jack fell asleep with a flicker of hope warming his chest. The Saturday morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Harper's Auto, casting golden patches across the concrete floor littered with oil stains and stray bolts. Jack Harper was already at his workbench, his hands black with grease as he wrestled with a stubborn alternator from a '98 Honda Civic. The garage smelled of metal and motor oil, a comforting constant in his world, underscored by the faint twang of a country song drifting from the old radio on the shelf. Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, lay just inside the house at the threshold of the open side door, his body half in shadow. His good eye watched Jack's movements, his bad leg tucked carefully beneath him, a silent observer who hadn't yet crossed into the garage's domain. The week had solidified their quiet routine. Rusty ventured closer to the kibble bowl each day, sometimes eating while Jack was still in the kitchen, and his evening retreats under the dining table felt less like hiding and more like a choice. Jack's one-sided conversations, stories of Lily, of engines, of Willow Creek's quirks, had become a nightly ritual, met with Rusty's attentive gaze. The dog's small breakthrough with the fallen crust had sparked something in Jack, a cautious hope that maybe they could build something together, something more than shared silence. The bell above the garage door chimed, pulling Jack from his work. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked up as a battered minivan coughed its way into the lot, its engine rattling ominously. A woman stepped out, her movements hurried but careful, as if she were used to carrying fragile things. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail and eyes shadowed by fatigue. Her jeans were faded, her sweater slightly frayed at the cuffs, but she held herself with a quiet determination. From the passenger side, a boy of about 10 emerged, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the ground. He clutched a small notebook to his chest, his fingers gripping it like a shield. "Morning," Jack called, stepping toward the minivan. "What's the trouble?" The woman offered a tight smile, her hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. "I'm Mia," she said, her voice soft but steady. "This is Ethan. The van's been making a grinding noise for weeks. I thought I could ignore it, but—" She trailed off, glancing at the vehicle as if it might betray her secrets. Jack nodded, already moving toward the hood. "Let's take a look. Ethan, you want to see how this works?" He gestured to the engine bay, a habit from years of teaching. Lily, but Ethan didn't respond. He stayed close to Mia, his eyes darting to the garage's open door where Rusty lay. Mia's smile softened, apologetic. "He's shy," she said quietly. "Doesn't talk much, especially around new people. He's particular about things." She squeezed Ethan's shoulder, and he leaned into her touch, still clutching his notebook. "No worries," Jack said, popping the hood. The engine was a mess of worn belts and leaking fluids, but nothing he couldn't handle. As he leaned in, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Ethan had taken a few steps toward the side door, his gaze locked on Rusty. The dog lifted his head, his good eye meeting the boy's with a calm intensity that Jack hadn't seen before. Mia tensed, her hand half reaching for Ethan. "He's okay with dogs, but—" "He's fine," Jack said, his tone gentle but firm, his eyes on Rusty. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't growled, just watched Ethan with a stillness that felt deliberate, almost inviting. Jack turned back to the engine, giving them space, but kept the pair in his peripheral vision. Ethan moved closer, his steps slow and measured, as if approaching a puzzle he needed to solve. He stopped a few feet from Rusty, lowering himself to sit cross-legged on the concrete, his notebook resting in his lap. Rusty's ears twitched, but he remained still, his scarred muzzle relaxed. Ethan opened his notebook, revealing pages filled with meticulous sketches, cars, tools, even a bird mid-flight, each line precise. He began to draw, his pencil moving in short, careful strokes, his eyes flicking between Rusty and the page. Jack stole a glance, noting the way Ethan's shoulders had softened, the tension in his small frame easing. Mia watched, her expression a mix of surprise and relief, her hand dropping to her side. "He doesn't usually—" She started, then stopped, as if afraid to break the moment. "Rusty's a good judge of character," Jack said, tightening a loose clamp. "Picked him up from Hope Haven last week. Nobody wanted him." Mia's eyes softened, her gaze shifting to Rusty. "He looks like he's been through a lot." "Has," Jack said simply, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. He didn't elaborate and Mia didn't ask, but the shared understanding hung between them, a thread of connection in the garage's hum. Ethan's pencil scratched softly, the sound blending with the radio's faint melody. Rusty shifted, stretching his good leg out, his body angling slightly toward the boy. Then, in a move that made Jack's breath catch, the dog extended his neck, letting Ethan's small hand brush against his fur. The touch was tentative, Ethan's fingers hovering before settling lightly on Rusty's shoulder, tracing a scar with the same care he gave his sketches. Rusty didn't flinch, didn't pull away. His good eye half closed, a soft sigh escaping his muzzle. Mia's hand went to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "He's never done that," she whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "Not with anyone." Jack nodded, his throat tight. He saw it too. The way Rusty's trust, so hard won, had chosen Ethan, a boy who carried his own quiet burdens. It was a moment of grace, small but profound, in the grease-stained heart of the garage. He turned, back to the engine, giving them privacy, but the image stayed with him. A scarred dog and a shy boy, finding each other in a world that hadn't always been kind. The late morning sun climbed higher over Willow Creek, its light streaming through the high windows of Harper's Auto, painting the concrete floor in warm, shifting patterns. Jack Harper stood by Mia's minivan, the hood still open, his hands sorting through a tangle of worn belts and corroded connectors. The engine's problems were straightforward, neglect mostly, the kind that came from too many months of hoping. A noise would go away. The radio hummed softly, an old Johnny Cash tune weaving through the clatter of tools and the occasional creak of the garage's metal roof. Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, lay near the side door, his golden coat catching flecks of sunlight. His good eye followed Ethan, who sat cross-legged beside him, sketching in his notebook with a focus that seemed to block out the world. Mia stood nearby, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of worry and resignation as Jack listed the repairs. "New serpentine belt, spark plugs, oil change, and that coolant leak needs fixing," he said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Parts aren't cheap, and labor's going to take a few hours." He kept his tone matter-of-fact, but he saw the way Mia's shoulders tensed, her fingers tightening against her frayed sweater. Money was tight. Jack could tell from the minivan's bald tires and the way she'd hesitated before agreeing to the diagnostic. I can pay in installments," Mia said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the radio. "We need the van for work, for Ethan's appointments. She stopped, her eyes flicking to Ethan, who was tracing Rusty's scars with one hand while sketching with the other. Jack followed her gaze, noting the ease between the boy and the dog. Ethan's pencil moved in precise arcs, capturing Rusty's form with a care that reminded Jack of Lily at that age, her hands steady as she sketched engine parts. Rusty's tail gave a single thump, a quiet acknowledgement of Ethan's presence, and Jack felt a tug in his chest, a memory of connection, of building something together. He cleared his throat, an idea forming. "Tell you what," he said, meeting Mia's eyes, "I could use some help around here, cleaning, organizing, that sort of thing. You do that, and I'll teach Ethan some basics. How to change oil, check. Fluids, we'll call it even for the repairs." Mia blinked, surprise softening her features. "You do that? I mean, he doesn't always follow instructions the way other kids do." Jack glanced at Ethan, who had paused. his sketching to rest his hand on Rusty's head, the dog leaning into the touch. "He's got good hands," Jack said simply. "You can tell by how he holds that pencil. Smart, too. Rusty likes him, and Rusty's picky." A faint smile tugged at his lips, mirrored by a hesitant one from Mia. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier now. "Okay, we'll try it. Thank you, Jack." "Don't thank me yet," he said, turning back to the minivan. "Let's get this thing running first." The next few days unfolded with a new rhythm in the garage. Mia arrived each morning, her sleeves rolled up, sweeping the floor and organizing shelves cluttered with years of spare parts. Her movements were efficient, learned from years of making do, but she carried a quiet gratitude that filled the space like the scent of fresh coffee. Ethan followed, his notebook always in hand, settling near Rusty while Jack worked. The dog had claimed a spot just inside the garage now, no longer lingering at the house's threshold, his scarred body relaxed in Ethan's presence. Jack started, Ethan with simple tasks, checking tire pressure, filling washer fluid, explaining each step with the same patience he'd once shown Lily. Ethan listened intently, his eyes fixed on Jack's hands, though he rarely spoke. His questions came in gestures, a pointed finger, a tilted head, and Jack answered them as naturally as if they'd been spoken. Rusty watched, his tail thumping softly whenever Ethan mastered a task, as if the dog understood the boy's quiet. Triumphs? One afternoon, as Mia sorted a box of mismatched bolts, Jack knelt beside Ethan, showing him how to use a dipstick. "See the marks here?" Jack said, wiping the stick clean. "Tells you if the oil's low. You gotta check it regular, like brushing your teeth." Ethan nodded, his fingers mimicking Jack's grip. Rusty, lying nearby, lifted his head, his good eye bright with interest. Jack chuckled. "Think he wants a turn?" Mia looked up from her work, a smile breaking through her usual reserve. "He's glued to Ethan," she said. "I've never seen him like this. Back home he barely leaves his room unless it's for school." Jack nodded, his thoughts drifting to Lily. "Kids and dogs," he said, his voice softer. "They get each other. Lily used to spend hours in here, just her and whatever project she'd dreamed up. Built a go-kart from scrap when she was 13. He paused, the memory sharp but not painful, softened by the garage's warmth. "Miss that." Mia's eyes met his, holding a quiet understanding. "She sounds special," she said. "Does she visit?" "Not much," Jack admitted, focusing. "On the dipstick. Lives out west now. Calls sometimes, but it's different." He didn't elaborate, and Mia didn't push, but the moment felt like a bridge, small but sturdy, built on shared silences and Rusty's steady presence. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the garage, Ethan set his notebook on the workbench, open to a new sketch, Rusty lying beside a toolbox, the lines capturing every scar with reverent detail. Jack studied it, his throat tightening. "That's real." "Good, Ethan," he said, his voice rough. The boy didn't look up, but his fingers tightened on the pencil, a silent acknowledgement. The garage hummed with purpose, the clank of tools and the scratch of Ethan's pencil blending into a symphony Rusty seemed to conduct with his watchful gaze. Jack felt the stirrings of something new, not just a routine but a family, fragile and unformed, taking root in the space where grief had once held sway. The late afternoon sky over Willow Creek hung heavy with the promise of a storm. Dark clouds rolling in from the west, their edges lit by flashes of distant lightning. Inside Harper's Auto, the air was thick with the familiar sense of grease and coffee, but a restless energy crackled beneath the usual hum of the garage. Jack Harper was finishing a tire rotation, his hands moving with practiced ease, while Mia swept the floor nearby, her broom's rhythmic swish blending with the soft country ballad playing on the radio. Ethan sat cross-legged on a folded blanket near Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, who lay with his head resting on the boy's knee. Ethan's notebook was open, his pencil sketching the curve of Rusty's torn ear with meticulous care. The dog's good eye followed the pencil's movements, his tail giving an occasional thump, a quiet anchor in the garage's steady routine. The week had deepened the bond between them all. Mia's work, organizing tools, cleaning workbenches, had transformed the garage into a space that felt alive again, its clutter giving way to order. Ethan's lessons with Jack had progressed to checking brake fluid and tightening lug nuts, his silent focus a mirror of Lily's at that age. Rusty, ever present, had become the garage's heart, his cautious trust extending to Mia and Ethan, his scarred body a testament to resilience they all understood. Jack had even hung one of Ethan's sketches, a detailed drawing of Rusty beside a wrench on the wall near the workbench next to Lily's old scarf, a quiet nod to the family they were building. A low rumble of thunder shook the garage, the sound reverberating through the metal roof. Rusty's head snapped up, his ears pricking, his body tensing. Jack glanced at the dog, noting the sudden shift in his demeanor. Sarah at the shelter had warned him about Rusty's fear of loud noises, a remnant of his years in a junkyard where storms meant exposure and danger. Jack set down his torque wrench, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "It's all right, old man," he said softly, his voice steady. "Just a little noise." Ethan looked up from his notebook, his eyes darting. To Rusty, then to the windows where the sky was darkening fast. Mia paused her sweeping, her grip tightening on the broom. "Sounds like a big one," she said, her voice carrying a forced lightness. "Hope it passes quick." Before Jack could respond, another thunderclap exploded, louder this time, rattling the tools on the workbench. Rusty's composure shattered. A low whimper escaped his throat and he scrambled to his feet, his bad leg dragging as he pressed himself against the wall, his body low and trembling. His good eye was wide, wild with panic, searching for escape. Ethan dropped his pencil, his hands reaching for Rusty, but the dog flinched, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. "Easy, boy," Jack said, moving slowly toward Rusty, his hands open and low. He remembered Sarah's advice. "Don't crowd." "Him? Don't grab?" He knelt a few feet away, ignoring the protest of his knees against the cold concrete. Mia and Ethan watched, frozen, as another flash of lightning lit the garage, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. Rusty's whimpers turned to desperate, quiet whines, the sound cutting through Jack like a blade. The dog wedged himself under the workbench, his scarred body shaking so violently Jack could hear his teeth chattering. Jack grabbed his old work jacket from a hook, the heavy canvas one he'd worn through countless winter repairs. He moved with deliberate care, draping the jacket over Rusty's trembling form, creating a makeshift cave to muffle the storm's assault. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice low and steady, the same tone he'd used with Lily during her childhood nightmares. "I got you, Rusty, it's just noise." Mia set the broom against the wall and knelt beside Ethan, her hand on his shoulder. "He's scared, sweetheart," she whispered, her eyes on Rusty. "Like you were during that storm last summer. Remember, we just need to stay calm for him." Ethan nodded, his small hands clenching into fists, his gaze fixed on Rusty. He reached for his notebook, flipping to a blank page, and began to draw, his pencil moving in quick, precise strokes, a sketch of Rusty, safe and calm, as if he could will the dog's fear away. The act seemed to ground him, his own tension easing as he focused. Jack lowered himself to lie on the concrete beside the workbench, the cold seeping through his coveralls. He stretched out, his head near Rusty's, the jacket a barrier between them and the storm's rage. Memories flooded back, nights spent lying on Lily's bedroom floor, her small hand clutching his during thunderstorms, her voice trembling as she asked if the sky was angry. "Just noise," he'd say, feeling her heartbeat slow under his palm. Now he reached out, resting his hand gently on Rusty's ribcage through the jacket. The dog flinched at first, a sharp intake of breath, but didn't pull away. Jack felt the rapid thud of Rusty's heart, the tremors running through his scarred frame. "It's just noise," Jack whispered, the words a bridge between past and present. "I got you." He kept his hand steady, his breathing slow, matching the rhythm he wanted Rusty to find. The storm roared outside, rain hammering the roof, but inside the garage, time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the space between man and dog. Minutes passed, maybe longer, marked only by the storm's relentless percussion. Rusty's breathing began to even out, his tremors less violent, though each thunderclap brought a shiver. Slowly, cautiously, he shifted under the jacket, his muzzle nudging closer to Jack's arm. The contact was tentative, a fragile offering of trust. and Jack stayed still, letting Rusty decide how much he could give. The dog's good eye blinked, half closed, his body curling slightly toward Jack, seeking the safety of his presence. Mia and Ethan watched, the garage quiet except for the storm and the soft scratch of Ethan's pencil. The crisis wasn't over. The storm still raged and Rusty's fear lingered, but something had shifted. Jack felt it in the weight of Rusty's head against his arm, in the way Ethan's drawing seemed to hold them all together. The garage, once a place of solitude, was now a refuge, its walls holding not just tools but the beginnings of a family forged in moments like this. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Willow Creek draped in a cool, clean stillness, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and pine. Inside Harper's Auto, the garage hummed with the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the high windows, illuminating specks of dust that danced in the air. Jack Harper stood at his workbench, sorting tools after the previous night's chaos, his hands moving with a quiet precision that belied the ache in his back from lying on the concrete floor. The memory of Rusty's trembling form, the weight of the dog's head against his arm, lingered like a melody he couldn't shake. The scarred Labrador retriever now lay on a folded blanket near the side door, his good eye half closed but alert, his scarred muzzle resting on his paws. The storm had left him subdued, but his presence felt steadier, as if the night's shared vulnerability had forged a new understanding. Mia arrived early, her minivan pulling into the lot with a healthier, thanks to Jack's repairs. She carried a thermos of coffee and a paper bag that smelled of fresh muffins, her dark hair tied back with a scarf that gave her a brighter look than usual. Ethan followed, his notebook tucked under his arm, his steps lighter as he made a beeline for Rusty. The boy knelt beside the dog, his small hand resting gently on Rusty's shoulder, tracing a scar with the same care he gave his sketches. Rusty's tail thumped once, a quiet greeting, and Ethan's face softened, a rare smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. "Morning," Mia called, setting the thermos and bag on the workbench. "Thought we could use some breakfast. Blueberry muffins, Ethan's favorite." Her voice was warm, but her eyes held a trace of the previous night's worry, lingering on Rusty before shifting to Jack. "How's he doing?" Jack poured coffee from the thermos into a chipped mug, the rich aroma grounding him. "Better," he said, glancing at Rusty. "Scared him good, but he's tough. Slept through the night after it calmed down." He didn't mention the hours he'd spent beside the dog, the whispered reassurances, the way Rusty's trust had felt like a gift. Some things didn't need saying. Mia nodded, her relief palpable. Ethan was worried, didn't sleep much himself. She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "He doesn't connect with many people, but Rusty, it's like they understand each other." Jack took a sip of coffee, his eyes on Ethan, who had opened his notebook and was showing Rusty a sketch from the night before, a simple drawing of the dog curled under the workbench, safe beneath Jack's jacket. "Kid's got away with him," Jack said. "Reminds me of Lily, how she'd sit with anything broken and make it feel whole." Mia's expression softened, a question in her eyes, but she didn't press. Instead, she handed Jack a muffin, the paper liner crinkling. "You're good with him too, Ethan, he listens to you." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just teaching him what I know." But her words settled in him, stirring a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He turned to Ethan, who was now arranging a small pile of bolts beside Rusty, as if including the dog in his work. "Hey, Ethan," Jack called. "Want to help with an oil change? Got a pickup coming in soon." Ethan looked up, his eyes bright with interest. He nodded, closing his notebook and moving to the workbench, Rusty following with a slow, limping, "Kate." The dog settled nearby, his presence a quiet encouragement as Jack guided Ethan through the steps, draining the old oil, replacing the filter, checking the gasket. Ethan's hands were steady, his focus absolute, and Jack felt a pang of pride like he had with Lily during their garage days. As they worked, Mia swept the floor, her broom's rhythm a steady counterpoint to the clank of tools. The garage felt alive, its usual solitude replaced by a shared purpose. Jack stole glances at the wall, where Ethan's sketch of Rusty hung beside Lily's scarf. The two symbols intertwined like threads in a tapestry. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed this: people, connection, the sense of building something. Beyond a fixed engine, when the pickup's owner arrived, a gruff farmer named Tom, he noticed Rusty and paused. "That the dog from Hope Haven?" he asked, scratching his beard. "Heard nobody'd take him." Jack nodded, tightening a bolt. "Name's Rusty. He's family now," Tom grunted, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Looks like he found the right place." He paid and left, the bell chiming as the door swung shut. Later, as the sun dipped low, Ethan approached the workbench, his notebook in hand. He hesitated, then placed it open on the surface, revealing a new drawing. Jack leaned in, his breath catching. The sketch showed the garage's interior, tools scattered, the minivan in the bay, Rusty lying by the door. But it was the figures that stood out. Jack at the workbench, Mia sweeping, Ethan sketching, and Rusty watching over them all. Across the top, in careful block letters, Ethan had written, "Our team." Jack stared at the drawing, his throat tight. The garage seemed to grow still, the radio's hum fading into the background. Mia stepped closer, her eyes widening as she saw the sketch. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's beautiful." Ethan didn't look up, but his fingers tightened on the notebook, a silent acknowledgement. Jack reached out, his calloused hand hovering over the page, then gently touched the edge. "This is something special, kid," he said, his voice rough. He glanced at Mia, then at Rusty, who had lifted his head, his good eye reflecting the fading light. "Mind if I hang it up?" Ethan nodded, a small, proud movement. Jack retrieved a thumbtack from a drawer and pinned the drawing to the wall, right beside Lily's scarf and Ethan's first sketch. The three pieces formed a quiet constellation, a story of loss and found family told in fabric and pencil lines. Rusty's tail thumped as if he approved, and Jack felt a shift in his chest, not the ache of grief but something lighter, like possibility. As Mia and Ethan prepared to leave, Jack stood by the workbench, the drawing's image burned into his mind. The garage, once a refuge for his solitude, was now a home for something more. Rusty had done that, not just by being there, but by drawing them together, a scarred dog who'd become their glue. Jack looked at the dog, then at the wall, and knew this moment was a turning point, a promise that they could build something lasting together. The autumn air in Willow Creek carried a crisp edge, the leaves outside Harper's Auto turning shades of amber and crimson, their colors vivid against the gray concrete of the garage. Inside, the familiar hum of tools and the faint twang of the radio filled the space, but a quieter undercurrent ran through the morning. Jack Harper stood at his workbench, adjusting a carburetor with a precision that masked the unease in his chest. His eyes kept drifting to Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, who lay on his folded blanket near the side door. The dog's golden coat seemed duller, his movements slower, as if each step required a deliberation that hadn't been there weeks before. His good eye, once bright with cautious trust, now held a clouded weariness, and his breathing came in shallow, deliberate. Huffs, Mia and Ethan arrived just after 9, the minivan's engine purring smoothly, thanks to their shared repairs. Mia carried a thermos of coffee, her smile warm but tinged with concern as she followed Jack's gaze to Rusty. Ethan, clutching his notebook, went straight to the dog, kneeling beside him with a gentleness that had become second nature. He placed a hand on Rusty's shoulder, his fingers tracing the familiar scars, but Rusty's tail gave only a weak thump, a far cry from the steady rhythm of their earlier days. Ethan's brow furrowed, his eyes searching the dog's face as if looking for an answer to a question he couldn't voice. "Morning," Jack said, pouring coffee into his chipped mug. "He's been like this since yesterday. Moving less, eating less." His voice was steady, but the words carried a weight he couldn't hide. He'd noticed Rusty's decline over the past month, longer pauses before rising, a reluctance to follow Ethan to the workbench, a tendency to sleep through the garage's usual clatter. Jack had hoped it was just age, just a phase, but the truth was settling in like the chill outside. Mia set the thermos down, her hands lingering on the workbench. "He's not himself," she said softly, her eyes on Rusty. Ethan noticed it too. He didn't want to leave him last night. She glanced at her son, who was now sitting cross-legged, his notebook open but untouched, his focus entirely on the dog. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. He'd spent the morning replaying every moment with Rusty, the first night under the table, the crust snatched from the floor, the storm that had bound them closer. The dog had become more than a companion. He was the thread that had woven Jack, Mia, and Ethan into something like a family. The thought of losing him felt like a betrayal of that bond, but Jack knew he couldn't ignore the signs. "Called Dr. Larson," he said, his voice low. "She's coming by this afternoon to check on him." Mia's hand reached out, resting briefly on Jack's arm, a gesture of comfort that felt natural now. "Whatever he needs, we're here," she said, her voice firm despite the worry in her eyes. Ethan looked up at her words, his small hands still on Rusty, and Jack saw a flicker of understanding in the boy's expression, a wisdom beyond his years. The morning passed in a subdued rhythm. Customers came and went, their usual chatter quieter as they sensed the shift in the garage's atmosphere. Ethan stayed by Rusty's side, occasionally offering water from a small bowl, which the dog lapped at slowly. Mia worked nearby, organizing a shelf of filters, her movements deliberate but her eyes frequently drifting to her son and the dog. Jack kept busy with a fuel pump replacement, but his focus wavered, his hands pausing as he watched Rusty's labored breaths. Dr. Larson arrived just after lunch, her vet bag slung over her shoulder, her expression kind but professional. She knelt beside Rusty, her hands gentle as she checked his vitals, her stethoscope glinting in the sunlight. Ethan watched, his notebook clutched to his chest, while Mia and Jack stood nearby, their silence heavy with anticipation. Rusty barely reacted to the exam, his good eye blinking slowly, his tail still. After a thorough check, Dr. Larson sat back on her heels, stroking Rusty's graying muzzle. "Nothing's wrong exactly," she said, her voice soft. "He's just old, Jack. His body's slowing down. Arthritis in that bad leg, maybe some organ fatigue. He's comfortable, but he doesn't have much time left." She paused, meeting Jack's eyes. "The best thing now is to make him feel safe, loved. Keep him warm, keep him close." Jack nodded, his throat tight, the words sinking in like stones. Mia's hand found Ethan's shoulder, squeezing gently, while the boy's eyes stayed on Rusty, his expression unreadable but intense. Dr. Larson packed her bag, offering a few more words of advice. Soft foods, a heating pad for the leg, before leaving with a promise to check in soon. The garage felt smaller after she left, the weight of her words pressing against the walls. Jack looked at Rusty, then at Mia and Ethan, and felt a resolve take root. "He deserves better than this spot," he said, his voice rough but determined. "We're gonna make him a place, somewhere special." Without a word, Jack began clearing. A corner by the western window, where the afternoon sun spilled in, warm and golden. It was a quiet spot away from the main work area, but within sight of the workbench, where Rusty could see them all. He dragged over an old area rug from the office, its fibers worn but soft, and Mia appeared with a thick blanket from her car, folding it into a plush nest. Ethan watched, then disappeared into the back room, returning with a small wooden crate he'd found among the spare parts. He set it beside the blanket, placing his latest sketch, a portrait of Rusty sleeping, on top, like an offering. Jack hammered a nail into the wall above the corner and hung Lily's scarf, its faded blue fabric catching the light. Mia added a small photo of Ethan and Rusty, taken on her phone and printed at the drugstore, the boy's hand resting on the dog's head. Ethan knelt, arranging a few of Rusty's favorite things, a worn tennis ball, a rawhide bone he'd chewed, to a nub, around the blanket with the same care he gave his drawings. Jack adjusted an old desk lamp to angle warmth onto the spot, its soft glow mimicking the sun. As evening fell, the garage settled into a gentle quiet, the radio off, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and Rusty's slow breaths. The dog had been coaxed onto the new blanket, his body sinking into its softness, his good eye blinking contentedly as he looked at his corner. Ethan sat beside him, reading aloud from a parts catalogue in a soft, steady voice, while Mia swept the floor, her movements a quiet ritual. Jack stood by the workbench, his coffee cold, watching the scene unfold. The corner wasn't just a bed. It was a testament to Rusty's place in their lives, a shrine to the trust he'd given and the family he'd helped build. Jack's eyes lingered on Lily's scarf, on Ethan's sketch, on the dog who had changed everything. The ache in his chest was still there, but it was softer now, woven with gratitude for this moment, this makeshift family, this dog who had shown them how to heal. The late October sun cast a golden glow through the windows of Harper's Auto, bathing the garage in a warmth that softened the edges of the concrete and steel. 3 weeks had passed since Jack, Mia, and Ethan had created Rusty's Corner, and the space had become the heart of their world, a sanctuary adorned with Ethan's sketches, Lily's faded scarf, and the small tokens of love they'd placed around the thick blanket where Rusty, the scarred Labrador retriever, now spent his days. The garage hummed with the familiar rhythm of work, tools clinking, the radio murmuring soft country tunes, the scent of motor oil blending with the faint sweetness of Mia's morning coffee, but an undercurrent of quiet reverence marked every moment, a shared awareness that time with Rusty was slipping away. Jack stood at his workbench, tightening a bolt on a radiator hose, his hands steady, but his eyes drifting to Rusty's Corner. The dog lay on his blanket, his golden coat dulled by age, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. His good eye, clouded now, followed Ethan, who sat cross-legged beside him, reading aloud from an old service manual, his voice a gentle cadence that seemed to soothe the dog. Mia worked nearby, organizing a tray of wrenches, her movements careful to avoid disturbing the peace of the corner. The garage felt full, not just of sound and activity, but of something deeper, a connection forged through months of shared moments, anchored by the dog who had brought them together. Rusty's decline had been gradual but undeniable. He no longer rose to greet Ethan, his bad leg too weak to support him, and his appetite had dwindled to small sips of water and the occasional lick of soft food Mia blended for him. Yet his presence remained strong, his gaze still carrying the quiet strength that had drawn Jack to him at the shelter. Each day customers paused to offer gentle words, their voices hushed as they acknowledged Rusty's Corner, a testament to the dog's impact on the town that had once overlooked him. As noon approached, Mia set out a lunch of sandwiches and soup, the warm bread's aroma filling the air. She carried a small bowl to Rusty's Corner, kneeling to offer it to the dog. His tail gave a faint thump, but he didn't lift his head. Ethan set his manual aside, his small hand resting on Rusty's ribcage, his fingers tracing the familiar scars with a tenderness that made Jack's throat tighten. Mia glanced at Jack, her eyes glistening but resolute, and he nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of the moment. Jack set down his wrench and crossed to the corner, lowering himself to kneel beside Ethan. He reached out, his calloused hand gentle on Rusty's head, the dog's fur soft and warm under his touch. Rusty's good eye blinked slowly, meeting Jack's with a recognition that felt like a conversation without words. The garage grew still, the radio's hum fading into the background, the only sounds Rusty's shallow breaths and the distant chirp of birds outside. Jack felt Mia settle beside him, her presence steady, grounding, as Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Time seemed to pause, the sunlight pooling around Rusty's Corner like a benediction. Rusty's breathing slowed, each inhale softer than the last, until a final gentle exhale left his body still, his scarred muzzle relaxed, his good eye closing, the tension of years melting away in a peace that filled the space with quiet grace. Jack's hand remained on Rusty's head, his jaw tight, not with grief but with a profound gratitude that threatened to spill over. Ethan leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against Rusty's fur, while Mia's free hand rested on the boy's back, her tears silent but unguarded. No one spoke, the moment too sacred for words. The sunlight continued to pour through the windows, warming Rusty's still form, the blanket cradling him like a final embrace. Jack reached for Lily's scarf on the wall, his fingers trembling slightly as he draped it over Rusty's body, the faded fabric settling softly against the golden fur. It wasn't a goodbye, but a honoring, a recognition of the dog who had stitched their broken pieces into something whole. After a long moment, Jack stood, his joints protesting, and moved to his workbench. From a drawer, he retrieved a piece, of oak he'd been saving, its grain smooth and rich. With careful hands he began to carve, each stroke of his knife deliberate, the wood yielding to form letters, R-U-S-T-Y. Ethan watched, his eyes red but focused, and Mia joined him, her broom set aside. When the carving was complete, Jack sanded it gently, the wood warm in his hands, and mounted it on the wall above Rusty's corner, beside Ethan's sketches and the scarf. Below it, Ethan placed a new drawing, a simple sketch of Rusty sleeping, labeled "The One Who Loved Us" back in his careful script. The garage slowly came back to life, its rhythms resuming with a new depth. Mia swept the floor, the swish of her broom a quiet hymn. Ethan returned to his manual, reading softly as if Rusty could still hear, his voice a bridge between past and present. Jack worked on the radiator hose, his hands steady, but his heart full, the corner's presence a constant reminder of what they'd built. Customers came and went, their voices hushed as they paid respects to Rusty's corner, leaving small tokens, a dog treat, a flower, that joined the growing shrine. As evening fell, the garage bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Jack stood by the workbench, his coffee cold but his chest warm. He looked at Mia and Ethan, who were packing up to leave, their movements slower, as if reluctant to break the day's spell. "Dinner at my place tonight?" Jack asked, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "Got some chili in the freezer. Could use the company." Mia's smile was bright, unguarded. "We'd like that," she said, glancing at Ethan, who nodded, his notebook clutched to his chest. They left, the minivan's engine a steady hum, and Jack turned to Rusty's corner, the plaque and scarf catching the last of the light. The garage was quiet but not empty. Its walls held the echo of Rusty's legacy, a family found in the unlikeliest of places. "Thanks for showing up, old man," Jack whispered, his voice soft in the evening air. He locked the garage, the two. Click of the bolt, a promise to carry Rusty's gift forward into a life that felt whole again.